So today, we're jumping into the history of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, the spring and autumn period, all the way through the Qing Dynasty. That's millennia.
It really is. We'll be touching on philosophical roots, key medical texts, how their understanding of the body changed.
And even how things happening elsewhere in the world kind of played a part.
So hopefully you'll get some real insights, maybe a few aha moments along the way.
Okay, let's dive in. We start way back. Spring and autumn, warring states periods, 771 to 221 BC. Pretty turbulent time, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. The old Zhou dynasty was, well, falling apart. States were fighting. It was chaotic.
But also, intellectually, things were happening.
Big time. This is the era of the 100 schools of thought, a real explosion of ideas.
The 100 schools.
Yeah.
Okay, what did that mean for medicine specifically?
Well, it meant that alongside all the politics and war, you had deep thinking about everything. Confucianism, Taoism, legalism.
Right. Big thinkers.
Exactly. And these philosophies weren't just abstract. They offered ways to understand the cosmos, nature, the human place in it all. And that directly fed into early medical thinking. It sort of bridged the gap between basic ideas and, well, applied science for health.
Ah, okay. So medicine wasn't off in its own little box.
Yeah.
It was part of this bigger intellectual ferment.
Precisely. And the sources show real medical progress starting then.
Like what?
Well, what the text calls the codification of AHM, ancient Chinese medicine, or what we're broadly calling TCM. We see the first specialized medical writings appearing.
Focusing on treatments.
Herbs.
Yeah, treating diseases, understanding medicinal substances, the materia medica,
Yeah.
compiling that knowledge. Gotcha. Now, this bit is fascinating, the mythos to logos idea, the shift in thinking.
Yes. It's really cool. You can actually see it in the Chinese character for medicine.
Oh, yeah.
The older versions included a component, wu, which means shaman, suggesting, spirit healers, that sort of thing.
Okay.
But later, around the Han Dynasty, that part changed. It was replaced by wuk, which relates to alcohol, often used in making liquid medicines.
Wow. So the character itself tells a story.
Pretty much. It visually shows this move away from blaming spirits or needing shamans towards using tangible things, herbal remedies, potions.
Less magic, more medicine. Makes sense.
Exactly. A definite shift towards physical treatments.
Okay, now, speaking of non-physical causes, ancestor worship. People often think ancient Chinese believed angry ancestors caused sickness. Was that true back then?
That's a really common idea, but according to our source, it's not quite right for this early period. While respecting ancestors was always important, the really elaborate rituals and the strong belief that unhappy ancestors were directly causing illness, that actually became much bigger later on.
When was that?
Mostly after the Song Dynasty, with Neo-Confucianism really taking hold. In these earlier times, it wasn't the main explanation for getting sick.
Good distinction. So while China's having this intellectual bloom and medical shift, what's happening elsewhere? Just for context.
Well, roughly speaking, you've got the foundations of Western philosophy being laid in Greece.
Socrates, Plato, that era.
Around then, yeah. In India, it's the Vedic period, the beginnings of Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism taking shape.
Okay.
And in the Middle East, early foundational texts for Judaism and later Christianity, plus empires rising and falling like the Assyrian Empire collapsing.
So big changes happening across the board, really.
Definitely. It puts the developments in China into a wider perspective.
Right. So that sets the stage. Now, the Qin and Han dynasties, 221 BC to 220 AD, this feels like where TCM really starts to look like, well, TCM.
Absolutely. The source makes a really important point here. There's the whole history of medicine in China going back ages, including folk practices.
Right.
But TCM as a specific system, based on yin-yang, the 5 elements, using acupuncture, specific herbal theories, that really crystallizes in the Qin and Han.
Okay, can you remind us briefly about yin-yang and the 5 elements?
Sure. Yin and yang are sort of complementary opposites. Think dark light, cold hot, passive active. They need to be in balance in the body.
And the 5 elements.
That's wood, fire, earth, metal, water. They represent different phases, processes, relationships, both in nature and within the body, how things interact dynamically.
Got it. So the Han Dynasty is where these ideas become the core of the medical system.
Pretty much, yes. This is where that mythos to logos shift really locks in for medicine, moving away from spirits and gods causing illness.
Towards more natural explanations.
Exactly. Rational interpretations of how the body works, how nature works. And it's interesting, this happened alongside advances in things like astronomy, math, geography.
So a generally more scientific-ish way of looking at the world was emerging.
Sort of, yeah, a more systematic observational approach. And that definitely helped formalize medical theory.
And the core concepts, yin-yang, 5 elements, meridians, the energy pathways, they get written down, systematized.
Precisely. The Han Dynasty was crucial for that. And Taoism, with its focus on nature and natural processes, seems to have had a really big influence here.
More so than Confucianism or Buddhism at this stage?
According to the source, yes. Taoism's natural scientific character lent itself more readily to developing these medical frameworks.
Okay. And this is the era of the big foundational texts, right?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely essential texts emerge now. First, the Shen Nang Ben Cao Jing, Shen Nang's Materia Medica.
Materia Medica about herbs and substances.
Exactly. Finished in the late Western Han, it wasn't the first list of herbs, but it compiled and organized everything known. About 365 items.
Why 365? Like days in a year?
Seems likely, yeah. It organized them into grades, like top grade, middle, lower, based on potency and toxicity. And it wasn't just a list. It explained theories behind how the drugs worked, their properties, where to find them, how to prepare them. It really set the foundation for Chinese pharmacy.
Sounds incredibly detailed for that time. What else? The Han Dynasty.
The Han Dynasty, the Yellow Emperor's canon of medicine. This one's more focused on the body itself. Physiology, how things work normally, and pathology, what goes wrong in disease. Foundational theory.
Okay, theory and herbs covered. Then there's the Shenghan Lin.
Ah, yes. Zhang Jing's Shenghan Lin, the treatise on cold-induced and miscellaneous diseases from the 2nd century A.D.
And the source calls him the father of medical prescriptions. That's a big title.
It really is. This book was a game changer for clinical practice. It detailed specific formulas, prescriptions, 375 of them, using over 200 different substances.
And these are formulas people still use.
Amazingly, yes. Many of the ways herbs are combined and prepared, the pharmaceutical forms described in the Shenghan Lin, are still fundamental to TCM practice today. Its influence is just immense.
So looking back at the Han Dynasty, huge steps forward.
Definitely. Key takeaways. Rapid clinical progress, diagnostics getting better, basic theory and acupuncture getting standardized.
The birth of pharmacy and prescription science.
And even the first written medical case records start appearing. It's really the bedrock.
And just to place it globally, while all this is happening, Rome is at its peak.
That's right. The Roman Empire is flourishing, building aqueducts, developing law. It's interesting, these two massive empires developing in parallel with incredible advancements in their respective fields.
Different focus, but peak civilization time for both. Okay, what comes after the Han? We enter a more fragmented period.
Yeah, the three kingdoms, Jin, Southern, and Northern dynasties, from 220 to 589 AD, a lot more political instability.
So did medical progress stall?
Not exactly stall, but the focus shifted. It became more about using the knowledge from the Han Dynasty, accumulating clinical experience, testing and verifying those foundational theories and techniques.
Consolidation, maybe?
That's a good word for it. Consolidation and refinement based on practical application.
And were there important new texts in this period, too?
Yes, a couple of really key ones for specific areas. The Zhen Jijia Yijing, or the ABC of acupuncture.
ABC, like the basics.
Pretty much. Compiled around 259 AD, it really systematized acupuncture. It laid out the points, the channels, the techniques, became the fundamental text for acupuncture practice for centuries.
So it took acupuncture theory and made it really practical, teachable.
Exactly. And then there's the Meijing, the pulse classic.
Pulse diagnosis, still a big part of TCM.
Huge. Written by Wang Shuhe in the Western Zhen, it described all the different pulse qualities floating, deep, rapid, slow, wiry, 24 different types, I think.
24. Wow.
And crucially, it linked these different pulses to specific internal conditions, a major step forward for diagnosis.
So Han laid the foundation, this period built the walls, maybe, put the theories into structural practice for acupuncture and diagnosis.
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. The source basically says that by around 300 AD, the core package was complete. Fundamental theory, Neijing, diagnosis, Meijing Leijing, acupuncture, Zhenjuji Jijing, herbs, Ben Kaojing, and how to use herbs clinically, Shenghenlin.
That's a solid toolkit.
It really is. The core of classical Chinese medicine established.
Okay, moving forward again. The Sui and Tang dynasties, 581 to 907 AD, often called a golden age, right?
Definitely. The Sui unified China again, briefly, and then the Tang Dynasty. Yeah, that was a high point. Technology, art, poetry, huge territory.
And openness, the Silk Road.
Very much so. The Silk Road was thriving, bringing lots of cultural exchange, new ideas, new goods.
And new medicines, presumably.
Yes. The sources mention things like frankincense, ruxiang, myrrh, moyao, aloes, luhui, turmeric, jianghuang, coming into the Chinese materia medica via these trade routes.
And printing started around then, too. That must have helped spread medical knowledge.
Absolutely. Woodblock printing developed, making it easier to copy and distribute texts, including medical ones, a huge facilitator.
Globally, what's happening?
This overlaps with the early spread of Islam and the Silk Road connecting China, not just westward to Central Asia, but influencing interactions with Arab and Indian regions, too.
So medical knowledge flowed both ways.
Seems so. Chinese medicine influenced others, and new substances and possibly ideas came into China. Things like fenugreek, figs are mentioned as introductions.
And within China, TCM itself continued to develop.
Oh, yes. It was seen as a time when the medicine conceived back in the Han was really completed through clinical practice and verification. The number of known herbs and prescriptions continued to grow significantly. Books on acupuncture, pulse diagnosis were published.
And didn't the government get involved in medical education?
It did. The Tang established an imperial medical academy, quite structured.
What did they teach?
They had general studies, like the classic texts, but also specialized clinical subjects, internal medicine, pediatrics, surgery, even things like ENT, cupping, acupuncture, training doctors for the state.
That sounds pretty advanced. And this is the era of Sun Simiao.
Yes. Sun Simiao, a giant figure.
What made him so special?
He was incredibly knowledgeable, wrote major works like the Qin Jin Yao Fang, 1,000 Golden Essential Prescriptions, but also known for his strong ethics.
Ethics.
Yeah, he developed a code of conduct for physicians, emphasizing compassion, deeply influenced by Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Apparently, he turned down offers to be an imperial doctor, preferring to treat ordinary people.
A doctor for the people. That's impressive.
He really embodied the ideal of the compassionate, learned physician.
Okay, after the heights of the Tang, we get the Song Dynasty, 960 to 1279 AD. The source calls this era highly civilized, almost modern.
Yeah, it's quite a description. It highlights things like advances in literature, governance that was relatively benevolent, a focus on peace, openness, and major inventions like gunpowder, the compass, movable type printing.
Movable type, before Gutenberg.
Way before, yeah. A period of incredible innovation.
And this is happening while the Crusades are going on in Europe.
Roughly, yes. Stark contrast in some ways.
So what was the big trend in TCM during the Song?
Organization and encyclopedias. So much knowledge had built up over the centuries.
They needed to catalog it all.
Exactly. Huge encyclopedia-style medical books were compiled, and the sheer numbers show the growth. Remember the 365 herbs in the Han text?
Yeah.
By the Song, they were documenting around 2,000 medicinal substances.
Wow. That's a massive increase. And prescriptions.
Same story. Building on the Shanghanlun, later works like Sun Simiao's Qinjin Yao Fang, and then song compilations like the Taiping Sheng Hui Fang pushed the number of recorded prescriptions up towards, well, maybe 17,000 or more, just vast amounts of clinical experience being recorded.
Incredible scale. What else marked the Song period medically?
Well, culturally, Buddhism's influence declined a bit, and Neo-Confucianism rose. The government took medicine very seriously. They set up a specific medical books press.
To print and standardize texts.
Exactly, promoting medical education. Also, pediatrics apparently made significant strides, and diagnostic skills generally improved across various fields.
So Song was about managing and expanding this huge body of knowledge.
Yeah, building on the past and really scaling up the recorded information.
Okay, next up. Jin and Yuan dynasties, 1115, 1368. Mongols involved here, right? Foreign rule with the Yuan.
That's right. First, the Jin dynasty in the north, then the Mongol conquests establishing the Yuan dynasty over all of China, another period of significant political change.
How did that affect medicine? Did it disrupt things?
Interestingly, it seems to have spurred a period of reform in medicine.
Reform. Why?
There was a sense, apparently, that some treatments, maybe harsh ones, were being overused or used incorrectly, so leading doctors started rethinking things.
And Neo-Confucianism was still influential.
Very much so. Its rise, incorporating some Taoist ideas about nature, led medical thinking to become, according to the source, a bit more speculative, more theory-driven. This actually led to different schools of medical thought emerging.
Different approaches based on theory.
Exactly. And you also had the rise of the Rui, the smeller doctors.
Who were they?
Confucian scholars, learned men who maybe didn't want to serve the Mongol government, so they focused their intellect on medicine instead, developing these new theoretical approaches.
Interesting. Did the Mongolians bring their own medical ideas too?
Yes, the source mentions Mongolian moxibustion and bloodletting techniques became quite popular during the Yuan. So, some exchange there too.
But the big story seems to be these new Chinese medical schools, the four masters of Jin and Yuan.
That's them. Really influential figures who offered distinct ways of understanding and treating disease. It wasn't just one monolithic TCM anymore.
Okay, who were they? What were their main ideas?
So you had Lu Wansu. His focus was on febrile diseases, fevers. He argued they were often due to heat and emphasized using cold and cooling herbs to clear heat.
Okay, cooling things down. Who else?
Zhang Kongzeng. He believed many illnesses came from pathogens getting stuck, accumulating inside. So his approach was about attacking the pathogen, often using herbs that induce sweating, vomiting, or purging to expel the problem.
More aggressive, maybe.
Could be seen that way, yeah. Then there was Li Gao, also known as Li Dongwan. His big idea was about digestion.
Spleen and stomach in TCM terms.
Exactly. He saw the digestive system, the spleen and stomach, as the foundation of health after birth. So his focus was on strengthening digestion, tonifying the spleen and stomach, especially for chronic conditions or weakness.
Makes sense.
And the fourth.
Zhu Zinheng, or Zhu Denshi. He looked around and felt many problems, especially chronic ones, arose because people's vital essence, their yin, got depleted through lifestyle, overwork, desires.
Okay.
So his approach emphasized nourishing yin, using herbs to replenish those deeper reserves and counteract what he saw as excessive fire or heat flaring up from deficiency.
So 4 distinct philosophies. Cooling heat, expelling pathogens, boosting digestion, nourishing yin.
Pretty much. It
Yeah.
shows real intellectual dynamism and debate within medicine during that period. They weren't afraid to challenge old ways and propose new models.
That's fascinating. Okay, then the Mongols are overthrown and we get the Ming Dynasty, 1368-1644, back to Han Chinese rule. Right. And a big emphasis in the Ming was on restoring and celebrating traditional Han culture, kind of pushing back against the foreign influence of the Yuan, following Tang and Song traditions.
Does that mean going back to older medical ideas too?
To some extent, maybe. But the source suggests the Ming was more about refining and verifying the new ideas that came out of the Jin Yuan period. Those four masters' theories were debated, tested, elaborated upon.
So building on the immediate past rather than rejecting it.
Seems that way. It was also another period where lots of comprehensive encyclopedia-type medical books were published, consolidating knowledge again.
And what about the rest of the world? This is Renaissance age of exploration time in Europe.
Exactly. Big changes happening globally. And you start to see more direct contact. Figures like Matteo Ricci, the Jesuit missionary, arrived in China.
Bringing Western ideas.
Yeah, Christianity, but also things like Euclidean geometry, astronomy, world maps. Not directly medicine-focused initially, but the beginning of more sustained East-West interaction. Around the same time, you have early missionaries like Francisco Xavier in Japan, and think of Vesalius revolutionizing anatomy in Europe, Da Vinci, Newton later. A different kind of intellectual revolution happening there.
So the world was getting smaller, in a way. Did this exchange impact TCM in the Ming?
The source highlights medical exchanges flourishing, particularly with nearby countries like Korea and Japan, but also the early seeds of European interaction were sown. The main focus internally, though, seems to have been refining the Jin Yuan innovations.
Right, which leads us to the last imperial dynasty, the Qing, 1644 to 1912. Manchurian rulers this time.
Yes, another conquest dynasty, but they ruled for a very long time, unified a vast territory. The source mentions the Q hairstyle being enforced.
Yeah, you see that in movies set in that era. Lots of martial arts films.
Yeah.
Wing Chun supposedly started in the late Ming to fight the king, then got used by them too. Complex history.
Definitely. And globally, this is the era of the Industrial Revolution in the West. Huge technological shifts.
How did TCM fare under the king, especially with growing Western influence?
Western influence definitely became more significant. Anatomy, based on dissection, started to gain more importance, challenging traditional Chinese views of the body.
Yeah, it must have caused some friction.
For sure. But Chinese medicine also continued to develop internally. A major development was the Wenbing school.
Wenbing. Warm diseases.
Exactly. This school focused specifically on infectious diseases, epidemics, things that didn't quite fit the old cold-induced framework of the Shanghan Lin. They developed new theories about how these diseases progressed and new herbal formulas to treat them. Very important for dealing with epidemics.
So adapting to new challenges. Were there other new schools too?
Yes, the king saw continued development of different theoretical viewpoints, new ideas about disease causes, new formulas. It wasn't static.
But the encounter with Western medicine was becoming unavoidable.
Pretty much. Especially by the late king. You had some Chinese doctors who were impressed by Western surgery or anatomy and wanted to integrate it. Others rejected it completely, wanting to preserve TCM untouched. And some even argued TCM should be banned in favor of Western medicine.
Wow, a real range of reactions, setting the stage for the 20th century, I guess.
Exactly. The interaction intensified, leading to debates that continue in some ways even today about tradition, science, and integration.
What a sweep of history. From those philosophical beginnings, through systematization, golden ages, reforms, and finally, this intense encounter with the West.
It's really quite a story. You see how medicine wasn't developed in a vacuum? Politics, philosophy, technology, cultural exchange, it all played a part.
Absolutely. Some things that really stick out for me are that visual of the character for medicine changing.
Yeah, from shamanism to substances.
And how critical those Han Dynasty texts, the Neijing Shanghanlen, really were. They set the course.
They absolutely did. And seeing how different eras had different focuses, consolidation, then reform, then refinement.
And the impact of external forces, whether it's herbs coming down the Silk Road or anatomical charts arriving from Europe.
It shows TCM has always been adaptable, absorbing and reacting to new information, even if it sometimes caused controversy.
And that adaptability is probably why it's still around, still evolving today.
I think that's a huge part of its legacy. It's not a fossilized system.
So a final thought for you, our listener, as you mull over this incredible history. Maybe consider how this constant interplay we've seen in TCM between holding on to tradition and embracing innovation or external ideas, how that dynamic might offer lessons for us today.
Yeah, whether it's in modern healthcare, trying to balance different approaches, or even in totally different fields facing similar tensions between the old and the new.
Something to think about. It's certainly a rich history worth exploring further.